the jeep. Her body was hot and doughy to his touch. She sank in the mud, and he had to pull her along and then carry her in some places. Butterscotch-colored water frothed around their legs, filled with tree limbs and garbage and all manner of debris they had to dodge. He helped her up into the vehicle, and her fingers trembled in his grip. Still the rain was falling in a torrent, washing across his windshield in a violence of nature he had never before witnessed. He had never seen it rain so hard, ever, and certainly not for this long. Asher knew he shouldn't drive through the water overtaking the first bridge, but they made it. The vehicle coughed up the hill, the engine choked with river, but managed to recover just before it sputtered out. By the time they reached the second bridge, it had disappeared beneath a pasture that had become a lake. Asher knew the land well, so he switched back around and pulled onto the railroad tracks where they racketed along, the jeep shaking like it might fall apart, Zelda letting out little yelps every once in a while, until they had reached the road to his house. The whole valley was underwater. From where they drove along the ridgeline, they could look down and see it all spread out before them like the end of time had come to Cumberland Valley. They watched a trailer home being swept away, the roof of a house, a pickup truck, cows struggling to stay afloat. "Oh no, Asher," Zelda said at that, as if he might be able to dive in and help the cattle to find higher ground, but they both knew there was nothing to be done. So many trees, all with the lush full leaves of late June. Chickens sitting in a calm line down the length of a white church steeple. It must have been swept from far up the river, as it wasn't familiar to him. He knew by heart the looks of every church nearby. Asher saw the brick walls of a house collapse, and then the roof was swept down the widening Cumberland while two men stood on the hill watching. He knew the house had only recently been built by a songwriter from Nashville. He hadn't lived in there more than a couple months, and now the house was altogether gone. Asher kept driving. He had to get back to make sure their house was still high above the water line, to see that Justin was all right. And there he was, waiting right on the porch for them. Justin leaned against the banister with his arms crossed, still miffed because Asher had not let him go along, not knowing how dangerous the roads would be. He was 8, but small for his age, and more like an old man in his bearing and thinking. Just as they pulled in, Lydia stepped out of the front door as if she had been watching at the window, and went to put her arm around Justin's neck, but he scrambled away from her, running out to greet his granny. Theirs was one of the lucky houses, situated on the ridge where the water couldn't reach them, although the river was far too close to put Asher at ease. The last flood had destroyed so much, but it had not threatened them. This one was licking awfully close, and if the rain kept falling, the Cumberland would have no choice but to keep rising until the water was seeping into their home. His church had been built on the highest point in those parts more than 100 years before, but many in his congregation would be homeless. Some of them had only recently rebuilt from the last flood. He had no idea how he would handle all the care they would need. Throughout the day, Zelda and Lydia watched the useless television news while Asher and Justin watched the river rise, watched the rain fall. Justin would not leave his side. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked, his green eyes latched on to Asher's green eyes. "Yes, buddy," Asher said, his hand capped over his son's head. "Don't you worry." But Asher was worried. Even worse than the rising water, even worse than the fact that they had not heard one siren or seen one helicopter or any sign of help from the government. They were alone out here then, he realized, until the storm was over. Help from the law always came after it was needed. Even worse than when the electricity blinked out of being. Even worse than Lydia doing nothing but praying in the shadowy cave of her room. Was that they couldn't find Roscoe anywhere. Asher stood in the doorway until Lydia said her quiet amen.